Thank you. First of all, thanks Emil for inviting me and also for giving me the opportunity to speak about the hottest shit, so to say, concerning frack on the markets, and it's the fracking for plastics link and the relationship between fracking, plastics and climate change, which is something that happens right now as a major development, but is completely under the radar. So it's not part of the climate change debate, and my work for the last year involved making people aware of this fact, but also teaming up with other movements, because in this fight we need a lot of movements coming together. I also like to thank Steve from Frack United, so he gave me his 5 minutes so I can talk a bit longer. What you see here is more or less the story in a nutshell. So you see ships that are coming from the United States to Grangemouth in Scotland, also to Norway, carrying frack gas in order to produce virgin plastics, which will end up being at least a bigger share of it single-use plastics. And this all happens at the time and moment when we've not only realized but also acknowledged the fact that we need to tackle global warming. We need to be very rapid about this in our decisions. And at the same time, we've also realized that there is a big plastic waste problem. While we see this, and while we've also put legislation in place at EU level at least to reduce single-use plastics, the fracking industry teams up with the petrochemical industry, in particular plastics industry, and works on torpedoing all our daily efforts to do exactly what we need to do. Next slide, please. But I want to start with kind of like giving you again a heads up concerning the the true climate impact of gas. Because for a long, long time, gas has been and still is being touted as a bridge towards a post-fossil future. And as long as we are not fully aware of the fact that a significant part of the problem can't be part of the solution, we will fail in our attempts to tackle global warming. So what this graph shows you, and I don't know if you clearly see it, but you can, you know, after the debate, you can ask SERA for the slides and you can all have the slides. So what you see here is in actual fact, very quickly where we're at. We only have 10 to 30 years to reduce global warming somewhere between 1.5 and 2 degree global warming. And the IPCC was pretty clear and used pretty dramatic words when they've said that, hey guys, you should better, you know, target 1.5 instead of 2.0, because the difference will have massive consequences. And we already see them. I mean, we're talking about the loss of essential resources like water, fertile soils, and we see people moving. And we debate a lot, also in Germany where I live, mass migration. This is nothing compared to what we will see when we will really overshoot this dangerous climate tipping points. So what you see in actual fact in the references is that pretty clear, we cannot achieve this if we tackle CO2 alone. So we have to focus on gas, we have to focus on methane. Now, what has this to do with the fracking industry? Well, we do have, through studies in the United States, we do have the scientific evidence that fracking contributes significantly to global warming because this industry is leaky all along the supply chain. And when methane leaks into the atmosphere, it has a very high global warming potential. Over 20 years, it's up to 90 times, it has a global warming potential of up to 90 times higher than CO2. A recent report published by Professor Howers gives us some numbers, and he came up with an average number of 4%. So during the whole life cycle of methane, starting from the well, pipelines, transport, maybe liquefying it, transporting it over the oceans, and so on and so forth, until you burn it or you transform it into electricity, he came up with this number of 4%. So if we have a 4% methane leakage in the full life cycle of gas, this means that gas is even is at least as bad as coal. I don't want to promote coal here, but we must be aware of the fact that we need to pay attention to this. Next slide. Now, what's that got to do with the petrochemical industry? Well, in actual fact, and I was also surprised to realize this, as a single industrial sector, this is the largest consumer of oil and gas globally. So we're talking about 14% of global oil consumption. When they say oil, they include natural gas liquids. These are substances that are found within shale layers beside methane. And the industry can use methane, plastic industry in particular, can use methane to power their very energy-intensive facilities. But they need the ethane, propane, and butane to produce virgin plastics. And that's exactly the development that we see. We see a major investment into new petrochemical facilities in the United States, over 300 announced investments since 2010, worth $200 billion. So when we come to the responsibility of the consumer, yes, we can do a lot to reduce our own consumption of plastics, but we have a massive supply-driven problem here, and no one knows about it. So as long as we don't tackle the source, we will still have the plastic waste problem. That's also what the EAI is saying. So they expect a growth of 70% in the trade of frack gas for petrochemicals, and it will be, a large part will be for plastics, another one will be for fertilizers. Next one. According to the numbers of the Center for International Environmental Law, if we pay attention again to the full life cycle of plastic production, starting again at the well, the plastic production itself, distribution, up until it becomes waste, they've calculated that by 2050, this full life cycle of plastic will generate 56 gigatons of CO2, and this equals 10 to 13% of the overall global budget that we have left to stay within a 1.5 global warming scenario. And this is significant. Why? Because again, we see now massive investment going on. And there's one company, an Anglo-Swiss company that is a key player into also not only introducing frack gas into Europe, but also using it to transform the petrochemical and plastic industry in Europe as a whole. Next one, please. And it's a company that you may know, it's INEOS, owned by one of the richest men in the UK. So basically their whole business model aims at more or less bringing us or holding us back from tackling global warming, but also tackling single-use plastics and the problem that is related with it. As I've already said, there is an existing supply chain to Grangemouth and also to Norway, but they have plans to expand their existing petrochemical facilities at Antwerp in Belgium, 3 billion euros planned investment, and there is no phase-out plan. There is no plan to at some point start a transition from this reliance on frack gas to something else, which is very crucial because this will create either a fossil lock-in, which we cannot afford, or it will create massive stranded assets. And if this bubble bursts, we're not talking about real estate, we're talking about crucial energy infrastructure. So now is the time to pay attention to it, and now is the time to say, now hold on a second, we need to immediately stop any new investments in new fossil fuel infrastructure, in particular infrastructure that aims at producing more virgin plastics. Why? Because their economic lifespan goes way beyond 2050, way beyond the point where we need to be at net zero. One last thing about INEOS, you shouldn't forget, in particular in the UK, that this company has transformed through the usage of frack gas from a pure petrochemical company to an oil and gas producer, which is very interesting. because they now have control over the whole supply chain. And at the same time, they bought very crucial infrastructure in the UK. They bought the Forties pipeline system. They bought North Sea oil and gas fields. And again, this is a company mainly owned 60%, 62% by one man. So we should also take into consideration the power concentrated in the hand of one man based on a business that is more or less an end-to-end pollution business model. So last slide is, we see a total frack in the US. We see the petrochemical and plastics industry in Europe that see a lot in each other. And my job is to put an end to this, and I hope that you will function as multipliers.